The first time I met Karen, she was measuring the height of my sunflowers with a ruler and a scowl, claiming they violated the Uniform Vegetation Visibility Clause. I laughed then. I'm not laughing now. Without missing a beat, she launches into her opening number. This is a violation of Noise Regulation 12B, Subclause 2, and I counted over 16 vehicles parked along the curb. That's illegal assembly. I blink. 16 cars? That's family. I have 5 kids, 10 grandkids, 2 in-laws I barely tolerate, and 1 dog that keeps trying to eat the hot dog buns. It's a birthday, not a revolution. But Karen doesn't care. Karen thrives on chaos. She walks straight up to my speaker, reaches for the volume knob, and tries to turn it off. My buddy Dan, who served with me back in the day and has been nursing the same light beer for an hour, puts a gentle hand on hers. "Ma'am, I wouldn't do that if I were you," he says, voice low and even. She glares. "Who do you think you are?" Dan shrugs. "Someone who respects birthdays." She huffs, mutters something about boomer entitlement, and storms back to her yard like a cartoon villain foiled by common decency. For a second, the air is still. I crank the volume back up. Laughter returns. My granddaughter slips into the pool wearing a pink floatie shaped like a flamingo. And then, 10 minutes later, it happens. Red and blue lights flicker across the backyard. A cop car glides up my driveway like it's arriving at a crime scene. Kids stop mid-splash. My daughter gasps. My neighbor Steve drops his plate of ribs. Karen stands at her balcony with the smug satisfaction of someone who just turned in a library book from 1983 and demanded the late fees be waived. 2 uniformed officers step out, looking more confused than concerned. I approach, hands in the air like I'm auditioning for a Netflix docuseries. "Sir, we received a report of a large, unauthorized gathering," the taller one says. "At what point does a birthday party turn into a felony?" I ask, trying to keep my tone friendly but firm. They exchange looks. The shorter cop checks a tablet. Caller reported excessive noise, suspicious activity, and possibly unlicensed grilling. I nearly laugh. Karen called 911 because I was grilling hot dogs? "This is my private residence," I say. "I've got permits for noise. We're under the gathering limit. And that grill has more certifications than Karen's high school diploma." Dan steps up, flashing his retired military ID. "Want to see my paperwork too? We're not exactly a cartel." The officers relax slightly, one even chuckles. They look around, see toddlers eating cupcakes, teens dancing awkwardly, and my dog Baxter chewing on a pool noodle. One officer actually mutters, "This is the nicest emergency I've ever seen." Karen isn't done, though. She comes stomping down her driveway, waving her clipboard and demanding the police shut everything down. She's got her own HOA handbook, printed in Comic Sans, with tabs labeled noise, grass, and violations. "I pay taxes," she shouts. "This is a family neighborhood." I step between her and the cop. "Karen, we are a family. That's what this is. Just because no one invited you doesn't make it illegal." She sputters like a tea kettle left on high. "You'll regret this, Frank. I'm filing a formal report with the board." "The board?" I asked. "You mean you, your cat, and your gnome collection?" The cop stifles a laugh. Karen stomps away, screaming something about bylaws and disorderly pool floats. The police, seeing no crime other than the emotional one Karen committed by existing, head back to their car. The party tries to resume, but it's not the same. The mood's been punctured. Guests whisper. My daughter comes over and says maybe we should wrap it up early, just to keep the peace. And that's when I feel it. That old fire from the days when I didn't take crap from bureaucrats in khakis. My heart thumps with indignation. My pride aches from being publicly humiliated at my own birthday party. She called the cops on me, on my family, on a party that brought life and joy to a neighborhood made of beige walls and fake smiles. That's not just annoying. That's war. Later that night, after everyone's gone and I'm sitting by the pool alone, I flip through a dusty box in my garage labeled Dad's Army Stuff. Inside, I find photos, patches, even a few commendations. But what really catches my eye is an old fire safety training manual from when I volunteered with emergency services back in '92. And suddenly, an idea forms. Not a petty one. Not revenge. A full-blown, legally sanctioned, community-shaking plan. If Karen wanted to call the law on me, she'd better be ready for what happens when the law starts calling back. I pick up my phone and dial my nephew. a battalion chief over at Station 12. When he picks up, I say 7 words that spark the beginning of my masterpiece. Hey kid, you still need training space? The next morning, the sun rose over the cul-de-sac like any other, bathing the tidy houses and trimmed hedges in golden light. But for me, it wasn't just another Tuesday. It was the dawn of Operation Pool Phoenix. While Karen was likely sipping her weak coffee and preparing another HOA violation notice in her lair of beige curtains and passive-aggressive scented candles, I was already on the phone with City Hall, asking very pointed questions about emergency preparedness training regulations. The receptionist transferred me 4 times before I landed on a cheerful clerk named Emily, who confirmed what I already suspected. Private property could indeed be used for firefighter drills, as long as it was approved by the local fire chief and didn't endanger residents or violate city codes. Lucky for me, I had both the paperwork and the nephew. By noon, my backyard was no longer just a crime scene in Karen's imagination. It was a potential emergency response zone. My nephew, Chief Ray Delgado, showed up in full uniform with a clipboard, a pair of mirrored sunglasses, and the swagger of a man who hadn't lost a single argument since high school. We walked the perimeter of my backyard while he took notes and occasionally whistled. You know, he said, scribbling something. This is actually perfect. The pool's big enough for water rescue simulations. The yard has space for obstacle setups, and the slope by your fence could be used for hose control drills. I tried to act casual, though inside I was already imagining Karen's reaction. Think the city will sign off. Ray grinned. Uncle Frank, when was the last time anyone offered us a backyard with a grill, a pool, and a willing host? You're about to be the fire department's favorite retiree. Later that day, while I reviewed the liability waiver with Ray and printed a fresh stack of permission slips, Karen launched phase 2 of her campaign against Joy. She dropped off an envelope at my front door filled with photos of my party, zoomed-in shots of my grandchildren, of guests holding drinks, of a half-eaten plate of nachos like it was Exhibit A in a felony case. Attached was a handwritten note in bright red ink that read, "This neighborhood is not a fraternity house. Consider this your official warning. HOA guidelines will be enforced. Sincerely, Karen." At the bottom, she'd drawn a little frowning face. I brought the letter to the living room, poured myself a glass of iced tea, and laughed for a solid minute before tacking it onto my fridge like a trophy. Then I got back to work. Ray sent in the paperwork that evening. The following morning, I received an email from the city's Emergency Services Department, approved for limited, scheduled use of private property for firefighter training. Just like that, my backyard was no longer just a pool with a grill. It was an officially recognized training zone. The fire truck showed up 3 days later. It was a thing of beauty, big, red, loud, and shiny. It pulled into my driveway and unfolded like a transformer, releasing a half-dozen uniformed trainees who stepped out with clipboards, fire hoses, and an air of excitement. My neighbors started peeking out from their curtains. Steve from 2 doors down brought his coffee to the sidewalk. Mrs. Albright across the street set up a lawn chair. And of course, Karen emerged from her front door like a Disney villain spotting a rebellion. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, marching across the street in her slippers. One of the fire trainees smiled politely. "Good morning, ma'am. Just your standard residential training session. We're running water rescue drills, fire hose coordination, and CPR simulations here." Karen blinked like someone who just learned her dog was actually a raccoon. "This is a private neighborhood." "Yes, ma'am," the trainee said, gesturing toward me. "And this gentleman volunteered his property. All cleared with the city, fully authorized." Karen's face flushed crimson. She turned to me, sputtering, "You can't just turn your house into a circus." "Karen," I said calmly, wearing my widest grin, "this isn't a circus. It's public service. You should be thanking me." She spun on her heel and stormed back into her house, slamming the door so hard a squirrel fell out of her oak tree. That day, my backyard transformed into the most exciting thing our neighborhood had seen since the Christmas light contest of 2011. The trainees practiced diving into the pool with rescue tubes. They rolled out hoses, ran obstacle drills, and taught CPR basics to anyone who wanted to watch. Even my dog Baxter got in on the action, wearing a little firefighter hat and barking encouragement. By the end of the week, What began as a retaliation stunt had evolved into something much more meaningful. Neighborhood kids started dropping by after school, asking questions about firefighting. Parents followed, curious and supportive. I installed a whiteboard near the patio to keep a schedule. Mondays and Thursdays became drill days. Saturdays were community demos. The smell of chlorine mixed with grilled hot dogs and the occasional blast of a fire hose became the new normal. Karen, however, wasn't going down without a fight. She began printing out flyers warning the community about unauthorized fire activity and posted them in mailboxes, door frames, and somehow even inside my grill lid. One of them featured a poorly photoshopped image of my pool engulfed in flames with the caption, "Your home could be next." Another simply read, "Do you trust your neighbor with your life?" complete with a drawing of a drowning stick figure. But her efforts backfired. The more she protested, the more curious people became. Parents who had once ignored HOA meetings were now calling me to ask about fire safety classes. Even the local news caught wind of it. A young reporter from Channel 8 showed up with a camera crew and did a feature called Blazing Trails and Backyard Safety, where I gave a heartfelt interview about community resilience and the importance of not being a stick in the mud like Karen. The segment went viral. A screenshot of Karen shouting from her porch with the caption, "This isn't Burning Man," became a meme, passed around by teenagers and boomers alike. I started getting emails from other neighborhoods asking how they could start similar programs. The fire department received new volunteer applications, and for the first time in years, our street felt alive. At the heart of it all was a simple truth. Karen tried to squash a party, and I built a movement. She wanted silence. I gave her sirens. She wanted compliance. I gave her community. And somehow, in all the chaos, I found a new purpose for an old man who just wanted to float in his pool with a cold drink and some good music. But I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. Karen had fired the first shot. I just started returning fire with training drills, public service, and a smile wide enough to make her lose sleep. Because when the war is over, who gets to swim in peace? I plan on doing laps with a lifeguard whistle and a city permit in my pocket. By the end of the second week, my backyard was less a private residence and more a local attraction. What started as a spite-driven stunt had grown into something no one expected, least of all Karen, who now kept her blinds permanently tilted like a CIA informant monitoring an international incident. The fire truck had become a familiar sight, parked snugly in my driveway every Monday and Thursday. Kids came running when they heard the siren. Parents lingered, coffee in hand, exchanging stories and jokes as firefighters taught CPR to a growing crowd. The neighborhood, once as lifeless as a tax seminar, had come alive. There was laughter, learning, and for the first time in years, a shared sense of fun. But with that came something else, fame. It started when Channel 8's segment hit the local news cycle. They had aired a 3-minute spot featuring me in swim trunks, sunglasses, and a floppy firefighter hat, teaching a 6-year-old how to toss a rescue rope to a floating teddy bear. The reporter wrapped it with a heartwarming monologue about community spirit. The next day, someone posted a clip of it online, and within hours, it went viral. Comments poured in. "This man is a legend. Pop off for president. And somebody get this guy a Netflix show." I didn't even know what TikTok was, but apparently a 15-second clip of me explaining how to roll a fire hose while chewing on a piece of beef jerky racked up 300,000 likes. One teenager commented, "This man has more drip than the fire hose." I had to ask my granddaughter what that meant. Soon, local businesses reached out, asking if they could sponsor signs at my next demo. A bakery donated cupcakes shaped like fire hydrants. A lawn chair company offered me a free recliner for official rescue recovery seating. One morning, I woke up to find someone had spray-painted "Hot Dad Alert" on my trash can. I wasn't even mad. But for every fan I gained, Karen lost another thread of her sanity. Her latest strategy involved stapling laminated flyers to streetlight poles with bold red text that read, "IS your house safe from poolside ignition?" Below was a crude drawing of my backyard on fire, with stick figures running in terror. Another flyer accused me of harboring unlicensed fire personnel and included a blurry photo of a firefighter eating a popsicle on my porch. She distributed one of her flyers at the local grocery store, which got her banned for 2 weeks when she slapped a cashier for not taking her fire hazard alert packet seriously. The best part? Nobody cared. Karen's credibility had become a neighborhood joke. Kids started calling her the Fire Banshee. Steve down the block put a sign in his yard that said, "Emergency Hydration Zone, sponsored by Frank." Even the mailman wore a little plastic fire hat one day. Karen retaliated by writing a 5-page complaint to the city, which they promptly ignored. Meanwhile, the fire department doubled down. They loved the visibility, the engagement, the public goodwill. Ray even told me their recruitment numbers had gone up since the program began. But Karen was persistent. When flyers didn't work, she tried a more official route. One Thursday morning, just as we were setting up a smoke simulation drill using harmless fog machines, a stern-looking woman in a pantsuit marched into my yard. She introduced herself as Leslie Granger, the HOA legal representative. Karen had apparently convinced the board, consisting of herself and 2 other residents she'd bribed with homemade zucchini bread, to send a formal cease and desist regarding unauthorized public gatherings and misuse of residential property. I invited Leslie to sit poolside, offered her lemonade, and calmly handed her the city's approval documents, my signed permits, and a personal note from the fire chief thanking me for my contribution. Leslie flipped through the pages, expression hard to read. After a long pause, she looked at Karen, who had followed her in like a lawyer's shadow, and said, "Legally, there's no violation here." Karen's jaw dropped so fast it nearly hit her orthopedic sandals. But the noise, the crowds, the danger. Leslie sighed. "Karen, he's helping the community, and his paperwork's airtight. Maybe focus on the fence paint violations you mentioned last month." Karen looked like she might cry. Instead, she stormed off, muttering about senior anarchists and conspiracy firemen. The next day, someone made a meme of her mid-scream with the caption, "When you realize HOA doesn't stand for haters of awesome." It was everywhere. But not everything was just memes and marshmallows. Something deeper started happening too. My neighbor's son, Jamal, who'd been struggling in school, started showing up to drills and asking serious questions. The firefighters let him hold tools, try on gear, even ride in the truck during stationary drills. His mother pulled me aside one day, eyes misty, and said he hadn't shown that kind of focus in months. Another neighbor, Alice, a widow, asked if we could host a safety seminar for the elderly. We did. 30 seniors showed up, asked 100 questions, and left with tote bags full of safety gear and new friendships. For the first time since my retirement, I didn't feel like I was waiting for life to slow down. I was in the middle of something good, something important. And just when I thought things couldn't get any more surreal, the mayor's office called. They wanted to invite me to an upcoming city council meeting to speak about community-led safety programs. Apparently, word had reached even higher up. I hung up the phone in disbelief. All this because Karen couldn't mind her own business during my birthday party. That night, I sat on my deck with a drink in hand, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. My grandkids were chasing bubbles in the yard. Baxter was curled up on my new lawn recliner. Across the street, Karen peeked from behind her blinds, scribbling in a notebook like she was building a case for the Supreme Court. I raised my glass to her window, gave a little wave, and leaned back with a grin. She wanted a war. What she started was a revolution. And we weren't even close to done. 3 weeks after my backyard had transformed into the hottest rescue zone this side of the Mississippi, Karen decided she'd had enough. I could feel the storm coming, like the air before a summer thunderclap, thick, hot, and ready to break something. I was watering my roses when I noticed her walking door to door with a folder tucked under her arm and a determined clench in her jaw. She didn't even fake a smile anymore. She marched up to houses, handed out papers, and whispered in hushed tones like she was selling insider secrets rather than neighborly slander. The folder, I would later learn, contained petitions, complaints, selectively edited photos, and a printed-out list of community infractions committed by one Franklin J. Reynolds. The title was in bold red, underlined twice. I'd seen war manifest in many forms over my lifetime, but I'd never seen it come packaged in a pleather 3-ring binder. The official notice came 2 days later, slipped into my mailbox with a self-important flourish and an unnecessary gold seal. It read, "Emergency HOA session called for Friday evening. Subject, probationary hearing for homeowner 1167. That was me. Apparently, Karen had successfully rallied just enough support, or at least enough apathy, to call an emergency meeting aimed at stripping me of my HOA privileges. She wanted to revoke my backyard's event status, fine me for noncompliance, and suspend me from community activities until the matter of public nuisance was resolved. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. Still, I knew better than to go in unprepared. HOA meetings, no matter how ridiculous, had the power to create real headaches if you underestimated them. I arrived at the session with a manila folder of my own, containing every city permit, fire department endorsement, neighborhood testimonial, and even a few screenshots of Karen's most unhinged online rants, just in case things got spicy. I also brought Dan with me, who looked like a retired bouncer and had a memory like a courtroom stenographer. He was there partly for moral support, partly to remember who said what in case anyone tried to lie later. The meeting was held in Karen's living room, of course. She had rearranged the furniture to resemble a courtroom, with folding chairs lined in neat rows, her armchair perched like a throne behind a coffee table stacked with binders and clipboards. Her cats perched on either side of her like furry bailiffs. About 20 neighbors showed up, some out of curiosity, others out of loyalty, and a few just because someone told them there'd be snacks. I stood at the front, facing Karen and her two reluctant co-board members, Doug, who once tried to pave his driveway with AstroTurf, and Linda, who showed up with a Tupperware full of lemon squares and no idea what the meeting was about. Karen opened the session with a tone so serious you'd think we were discussing nuclear disarmament. She read from a prepared statement detailing the alleged chaos I had unleashed upon the neighborhood. Traffic congestion, noise pollution, flagrant use of city resources, and my personal favorite, unauthorized distribution of popsicles to minors. She paced as she spoke, punctuating her words with dramatic pauses as if trying to land a Broadway audition. When it was finally my turn, I didn't go for theatrics. I simply handed out copies of my documents. I read a few heartfelt testimonials. I showed a video of a recent fire drill where kids were learning to use extinguishers under professional supervision. Then I played a voicemail from the fire chief thanking me for supporting their training and increasing youth engagement. The room was quiet when it ended. Before Karen could regain her footing, a hand shot up from the back. It was Alice, the widow who'd attended the senior safety seminar. She stood up slowly, looked Karen dead in the eye, and said, "If you shut this down, you're not just stopping a bunch of hoses and whistles. You're stopping the first thing in years that's actually brought us together." Then Steve stood up. "Frank taught my daughter how to do CPR. She saved her baby brother from choking on a piece of candy last week. You think that's a public nuisance?" More hands went up, more voices followed. Stories, laughter, even a few teary nods. Karen tried to interrupt, but no one was listening anymore. The crowd had spoken. It wasn't just about pool drills or noise complaints anymore. This had become something bigger, an unofficial vote about what kind of neighborhood we wanted to live in. One that embraced connection and service, or one that let clipboards and noise meters run the show. Doug cleared his throat awkwardly. "I mean, if the city's fine with it and the fire department likes it, I don't see the issue." Linda looked confused. "Wait, are we voting on lemon squares or Frank?" The vote wasn't even close, 19-1. Karen cast the only dissenting vote, looking like someone who just found out her cat preferred someone else's lap. The session ended with an impromptu cookout on my lawn. People brought chairs, someone played music from their car, and the kids chased each other with squirt guns. Karen retreated into her house, her curtains snapping shut with the finality of a prison door. But even behind closed windows, we could hear the unmistakable sound of her blender, no doubt whipping up another batch of zucchini bread in preparation for her next strategic misfire. That night, as I sat on my deck with my grandkids, watching the neighborhood glow with laughter and little plastic firefighter helmets, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, something more than pride or relief. I felt rooted, part of something, not just a grumpy retiree with too much time on his hands, but someone who mattered to the people around him. And then I saw her, Karen, watching from her darkened window, phone in hand and eyes glinting with that same fire that had fueled her crusade from the beginning. She hadn't given up. I could feel it. No, she was planning her next move. Something desperate, something over the top, something only Karen would think was a good idea. And I welcomed it, because the more she tried to bury me, the more she proved just how high I had already risen. 2 days after the HOA hearing ended in what could only be described as a backyard barbecue victory party, I thought the chaos had finally simmered down. The firefighters had scheduled their next drill for Saturday. The neighborhood felt more united than it had in years, and even the mailman gave me a thumbs up as he dropped off the day's letters. I was back to enjoying my peaceful mornings with a hot cup of tea and Baxter curled up at my feet. But deep down, I knew better than to trust the calm, because Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was a storm disguised as a neighbor. And when people like her lose control, they don't just walk away, they double down. It came in the form of a certified letter delivered by courier, hand-signed and embossed with the city's official seal. The moment I opened it, I knew it wasn't bad news. It was a formal commendation from the mayor's office, recognizing my extraordinary contribution to community safety and engagement through private-public cooperation. At the bottom was a personal note from the mayor herself, inviting me to speak at the upcoming council meeting as a guest of honor. It felt like I'd been handed a golden ticket, one signed in city ink and sealed with every ounce of Karen's frustration. I didn't have much time to bask in the glory. Word spread fast, and soon enough, my phone started ringing. Reporters, local bloggers, a podcast host who wanted me to talk about senior activism through aquatic infrastructure. I politely declined that one. But the best call came from Ray, my nephew, who told me the fire department wanted to name their new youth outreach initiative after me. They were calling it the Blaze Zone Initiative, a hands-on safety program inspired by what we built in my backyard. I nearly dropped the phone. To think all of this had started because Karen couldn't stand a pool party. But I wasn't the only one receiving attention. Turns out, when you become a local hero, some people start digging, just not always where they should. One of the younger firefighters, a sharp-eyed rookie named Mateo, had been helping me organize files for the Saturday drill when he found something odd. While browsing the city's property database, he spotted Karen's house listed under an outdated zoning category and noticed she didn't have an approved permit for her backyard spa setup, which, based on Mateo's own Instagram sleuthing, had been used for regular spa product demonstrations and, get this, essential oil sales. A few phone calls and one very enthusiastic city inspector later, the truth unraveled like an overwound garden hose. Karen had been running an under-the-table multi-level marketing operation from her deck, pitching overpriced bath salts and anti-aging creams to other HOA members. The best part? She'd built an unpermitted hot tub enclosure last year and never declared it. She had been so focused on policing everyone else's yards that she forgot to cover her own tracks. I didn't have to lift a finger. When Saturday finally came, the Blaze Zone initiative kicked off with a full neighborhood turnout. Kids wore miniature fire helmets, families gathered for live demonstrations, and even the local news crew came back to film a follow-up segment. Ray gave a speech. Then the mayor herself arrived, shook my hand, and thanked me in front of everyone for turning adversity into action. I responded the only way I knew how, with sincerity and a little humor. I'd like to thank the real MVP of this movement. I said into the mic, pausing just long enough to let the tension build. Our very own HOA president, Karen, whose endless complaints inspired the most fireproof summer this neighborhood's ever seen. The crowd erupted. Some laughed, some cheered. Even Dan let out a loud amen. Karen, standing at the edge of her lawn, scowled and retreated behind her porch railing like a turtle ducking into its shell. Later that evening, long after the fire truck had pulled away and the smell of grilled corn still lingered in the air, I sat on my deck, watching the sun dip below the horizon. My grandkids were playing with glow sticks, neighbors chatted over drinks, and for a moment, the world felt right, peacefuler. But just as I closed my eyes to take it all in, I heard the unmistakable sound of a moving truck backing into the driveway of the vacant house 3 doors down. Curious, I stood and leaned over the railing, watching as the truck's rear doors swung open. A woman stepped out, late 50s, Bluetooth headset in one ear, holding a folder thick enough to make Karen's look like a napkin. She surveyed the street with sharp eyes, made a note on her clipboard, and frowned at my garden gnome like it had personally insulted her landscaping philosophy. I turned to Dan, who had joined me on the deck with a soda in hand. He followed my gaze, took one look at the new neighbor, and groaned. Please tell me that's not what I think it is. I think it is, I said, half smiling. Another Karen? Or at least a new chapter. I took a sip of my drink, leaned back in my chair, and said the words I knew were coming. Well, looks like I'm going to need more fire helmets.